Hi guys, my name is V and welcome to my book nook. So in today's video, I wanted to talk to you guys about all the books that I read in January. I read about 8 books, which is not a lot, but I'm so excited to talk about them. Some of them are just so amazing. And get comfortable, grab a cup of coffee, and let's get started. So the first book that I read this month is Caraval by Stephanie Garber. So this is a young adult fantasy book, and this was such a good time. It follows this girl, Scarlett Ragnar. She grew up on the small isle. She and her sister have a very difficult life, and all she wants to do is protect her sister. Scarlett always wanted to go to Caraval, which is this carnival that's almost like immersive theater. It's run by this magician named Legend, and Caraval is held once a year at a different location, and you can only go there if you are invited. So Scarlett has been writing to Legend every year for about 7 years, and finally she gets a invitation. So Caraval is almost like a magical treasure hunt, right? So you basically follow the series of clues and you try and find whatever the missing object or item is, and in exchange you get a wish from Caraval Master Legend. It's a very magical kind of experience where you can't really tell what's real and what's not real. He invites Scarlett to, her dream come true, and Scarlett doesn't want to go. Her sister Tilla enlists the help of this sailor named Julian, and they essentially kidnap her and end up going to Caraval. But when they get there, it's not as magical as she hoped, and it almost has this underlying dark atmosphere. Tilla goes missing. So we follow Scarlett's journey through trying to find her sister. The second book that I read was Legendary, also by Stephanie Garber. This is the second book in the Caraval trilogy, and in this book follows Scarlett's sister Tilla. And without spoiling much, in the first book, Tilla made a series of deals that are basically catching up to her now, and this book we follow her dealing with these consequences. There's a new dimension introduced in this book. So in the first book, we don't really get a sense of the world building, but in this book, we are really introduced to this new concept of fates, which are these godlike immortal beings who are trapped in a deck of cards. They each have like their own magic, and they basically wreak havoc on people. And then the third book I read was Finale, which is basically the conclusion to the Caraval trilogy, right? So this book, you get a bit of Tilla's point of view, a bit of Scarlett's point of view, and you basically wrap everything up. I do think that if you've read Caraval, right, and you didn't like the first book, because I did feel like in the first book, the characters felt a little bit one-dimensional. But Stephanie Garber's writing gets better and better with every book, and by the end of it, you just really have such a good time. There is a subplot of romance in both books. And then the fourth book that I read was Spectacular. It's this short Christmas novella, which is also set in the world of Caraval. We're following Tilla and all of the same Caraval cast of characters during Christmas time. This is set after the trilogy. The artwork in this was absolutely stunning. It really did deliver on the Christmas vibes. I know I read it in January, but it still, really had that holiday feeling to it. The only issue I had was with Spectacular was, I don't think, if you've read it, right, you know what I'm talking about. The whole plot line, I don't think Tilla was comfortable with everything that happened in the way that it happened, and I was just a little bit confused. I'm not in a bad book, it's just, it was a little bit difficult to enjoy knowing that she wasn't comfortable. I mean, it's a YA book, but that storyline didn't really feel YA, but overall, the Caraval trilogy was such a good time. It is more on the younger YA side of things. One of my main reasons for reading Caraval was I read Once Upon a Broken Heart about a year and a half ago, and I loved it. So Caraval was good. It was a good time. I enjoyed it, but it wasn't like my favorite fantasy of all time or anything like that. But Once Upon a Broken Heart, this trilogy is just everything to me. I reread it this year. When I first read Once Upon a Broken Heart, right, I read it without Caraval. So this time I reread it and I wanted to know, because one of the main characters in Once Upon a Broken Heart is a side character in Caraval. This is Jax, the Prince of Hearts, who is a fate, right? So Once Upon a Broken Heart takes place in the same world. It's a spin-off from Caraval in the same world. So you kind of need to know what happens in Caraval because it does spoil it for you. So when I read Caraval, I kind of went into it knowing some of the spoilers already, but they didn't really take away from the experience because I read so long ago, I didn't really remember much. Before I read Once Upon a Broken Heart again, I wanted to know all these things, and it really helped so much because I feel like Caraval sets up the world a lot better, and you really get to see the characters in a different way, especially Jax. Jax is the Prince of Hearts. All the fates kind of have a curse, right? So Jax, if he kisses someone, his kiss will kill them. So then the next book that I read was Once Upon a Broken Heart. This series, this trilogy owns my heart. It is so amazing. It is everything. Stephanie Garber's writing from Caraval to this improved so much, and everything in this book is just so amazing. One of my favorite things in the series is Evangeline, the main female character, who is just a breath of fresh air. She's not your typical fantasy lead. She's just this kind, almost naive girl who's so hopeful, and she really believes in happy endings and finding her true love. Most fantasy books, you'll notice that the female character will either go through this change where all of a sudden she becomes this really super powerful being and she can fight, and then there'll be a war, and you know that's where her strengths lie. But Evangeline's strengths lie somewhere else, where she's still a strong person and a strong character, but it's just her strengths lie differently, and I thought that was just really nice. I didn't even tell you guys what this was about. So Once Upon a Broken Heart follows Evangeline Fox, and she makes a deal with the Prince of Hearts. So the person that she's in love with, she finds out is marrying someone else. So she makes a deal with Jax to stop the wedding. And the story kind of follows her from there. And then we find out that maybe everything that's happening to her is actually part of a plan that she's not aware of, and you as the reader are also not aware of it. So when you're reading this, you kind of don't really know where it's going. With Caraval, you kind of knew the plotline you were going with and where you were trying to get to, but with this one, you don't really know where you're heading because you don't know all the players in the book, you don't know all the pieces, you are just as in the dark about everything as Evangeline, where she's kind of being thrown around from one plot to the other. There's a whole lot of curses involved that she doesn't understand, and it's just such a good time. But writing in this book, it's just the way food is described, the way the dresses are described, the way it's just so whimsical and magical, and you really feel like you are immersed in this book. This book I read was The Ballad of Never After. I honestly believe this was probably one of my favorite books that I've ever read in my whole life, because there's just something in this book. I don't know what's in this book, but it just made me fall in love with it. We pick up from where we stopped off in Once Upon a Broken Heart. I'm not going to spoil anything, but that book kind of ended in an almost cliffhanger, right? Where you kind of think now, okay, I think I know where the story is going to go. And this book is just the banter, the tension, and the yearning in this book between Jax and Ava is just everything. The amount of scenes in this book, I even tabbed this book, and the way this book ended, my jaw was on the floor. I know this was a reread. Reading this entire trilogy again was kind of like reading it for the first time, in the sense that I was reading it with new eyes, because I had so much more information from Caraval, and because you kind of know what's going to happen. There's so many subtle hints throughout the book that the first time you didn't really pick up on it, right? Because you don't really know where it's going, you don't know what to look for. But reading it a second time, it was kind of like, oh my God, this was such a small scene. I didn't realize that it had such a big impact, right? I loved it. The amount of cute scenes, the banter, the Jax is just, oh my God, it was just such a good time. And I cannot stress this enough. The ending in this book, the way this book ends, Stephanie Garber could have stopped it there. It would have been a crime, but she could have stopped it. It was so painful to read the way this book ended, but it was worth it. Third book in this trilogy was A Curse for True Love, and this one picks off just where the other one left off. It was so difficult to read this one because of the way the other one ended. I was just waiting for certain things to get fixed and to get resolved, but it did have a satisfying ending. For some reason, I was so anxious to get to the ending of this one. I read this book in like a day because I needed to know what was going to happen. I know a lot of people say that this book was disappointing. I think the first time I read it, I could kind of understand because you were expecting more Ava Jack scenes, especially from the Ballad of Never After. Like the other two books kind of had plot twists that you didn't really see coming, but this one was a little bit more straightforward. I reread it, I really just had a good time, and I'm gonna have such a bad book slump after this because these books are just so good and so amazing. I cannot recommend it enough. 6 books sounds like a lot to read, right? But you could possibly read Once Upon a Broken Heart, that trilogy on its own. There will be some stuff that you don't know, right? But I think you'll be able to understand it because when I read it the first time, I did understand. It just adds something more to it and it gives you a little bit more understanding. But this trilogy. So the next book that I read this month was Everything I Know About Love by Dolly Alderton. I know it's going from so many fantasy books. I read like 7 fantasy books and then I switched over to a nonfiction. So this is a memoir following her life, basically from growing up, from her adolescence till like her early 20s. This book surprised me. It really resonated with me, and the first 30% of the book was kind of slow, and the way she grew up just wasn't relatable to me personally, and I almost DNF'd this book, right? But then there was a chapter and I was like, okay, I understand what people are talking about now. I think if you're a girl in your 20s, right, early 20s, this book has so much that you can learn from and take from, and the way that Dolly Alderton articulates certain feelings and emotions that you didn't even realize that you've experienced, because a lot of the things in this book are just such universal experiences that people hardly ever talk about. And the overarching theme about your female friendships being the true loves of your life, because those are the people that really carry you through all your romantic heartbreaks and through your entire life. Those are the people that shape you and carry you and truly love you. I don't think people talk enough about how important your female friendships are in your life. It's very validating. Some of the things she's experienced and felt kind of make you feel like it's okay if life is a bit messy, and for you to go through things and to really not follow this straight path and trajectory. And it was just such a good book that I think will really stick with me. Just such a powerful book, and the quotes in this book are just so amazing. It just really resonated with me. I finished this like 2 weeks ago and I'm still thinking about it. I know I didn't have the greatest reading month in terms of the number of books I read, but I think the quality of books I read this month was such a good way to start off the year. You guys will give some of these books a try because I just had such a great time reading them. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed today's video, and I will see you guys next week.